dancing on ecstasy that it's very, very hard to drink too much water. That you would start to feel, effects of wanting to stop drinking water well before you actually hurt yourself in that case. I think another trick of cooling down is to just be pouring water on yourself, washing off, so you're not necessarily like having to be drinking it constantly. But again, well, I think naturally making sure to not be drinking too much if you're not sweating and feeling thirsty. So not just going out of your way continuously to force yourself drinking water if you do feel comfortable enough. And of course, and this is kind of like a blanket statement for any situation, which was definitely touched on in a few episodes, but having a buddy there, a friend to watch you, ideally someone who's not going to also go unconscious, would be a good way to have somebody else, watching out, kind of seeing whether you're going too far in one direction or another. But that is an annoying kind of, I understand, where both extremes there's potential danger. But I honestly think that, as a side, I think humans are basically dehydrated in general. Most of us don't drink anywhere near the amount of water we're actually supposed to drink every day, even when we're not on drugs. So, again, really hard to hurt ourselves drinking too much water. It could also cause you to just start vomiting. Most people would start puking up or having trouble drinking at some point. Yes, sir. What's your name?
I'm Elian. I'm a third-year student here, and I found actually, because I'm a movie maker myself, and
Awesome.
I found very interesting stories right here. Personally, I enjoyed the ketamine chapter, so I wrote a couple of questions here I would like to know about. If someone would try ketamine, and how would be their reaction if they didn't know the exact symptoms? And what do you think would happen if somebody would have ketamine with, let's say, sniffing accidentally or unconsciously through a drink or something? How would their psychological reaction be?
And the most common way that happens is if somebody is at a party, they think they're being given cocaine or MDMA powder form, and it's ketamine. I think it's scary, initially. In a few scenes, it's talked about the fear of not knowing what exactly we're on, especially when it's something we did not expect. I'm kind of mishmashing the question a little, but the fact is that we never know for sure what we're snorting or drinking. And this is a big part of the problem as conveyed in the MDMA scene with things being unregulated, which is completely tied in with things being illegal. We can touch on this later, but just to say, I think that if everything, on a gradual kind of strategy plan, if everything were to be made first decriminalized and eventually legal, and then regulated, and educated on, taxed on, that everything would be safer. If we could know our dose, right? And if our bag of ketamine had its ingredients in it, and we could sue a company if it was wrong, someone was actually reliable for it, this would all be much, much safer. Not to mention the countless benefits for the world globally, if we weren't suffering the costs of illegal drug trade. But ketamine, do they get to, in this theoretical situation, do they get to find out what it is in the end, or they just have to kind of ride through it? I mean,
for example, if they have ketamine without knowing that it is ketamine, how would their reaction be? without knowing even that they sniffed ketamine, for example, through a drink, if somebody puts their...
Right. It's a
Would it
much,
be different when somebody knows that it is ketamine and expects the symptoms? Or it's
okay.
kind of like...
It would be different if we were talking about psychedelics, like acid, mushrooms, because the trip is so affected by one's mindset, right? With ketamine, I think someone would experience similar physical effects. And if that person is experienced and composed in general, could think, I've been drinking with strangers, someone might have drugged me, or that cocaine I thought I was snorting is ketamine, or let's figure out what that was, and ride it out, and try to, take safety precautions. But I think they'd experience the same dissociation, maybe dizziness, unbalanced, out-of-body feeling. But if they are in an appropriate enough setting where they can just handle being on something and not too nervous, I think that they would be okay. If somebody is very anxious and will just start freaking out about experiencing things that they're not ready for, or even that they were ready for, I would suggest that that person probably just go to the hospital and tell them, like, I took something and I don't know what it is, or someone slipped me something, maybe, better defense, and, make sure I don't die. Put me in a bed. And off of that answer, another tangent about Good Samaritan policies. Do these exist? Do folks know the Good Samaritan policy? This exists at college campuses and in different states in the US. It might not exist because it's already exists, it doesn't even need a name. But the notion that if me and my friend are on mushrooms and having a bad time, this was talked about in the introduction, that we could go to the hospital and tell them, we both took mushrooms, my friend thinks she's dying, please take care of us. And we cannot legally get in trouble. For a long time, you would get in trouble in most states in the US and on many college campuses, not just with the law, but with, academic administration, right? A lot of kids I know would rather get arrested on the street than actually get in trouble and be forced to take a semester off school. Fucks with your life worse. So many of these laws, again, are kind of counterintuitive in my mind. They actually increase the dangers, right? So many times I was too drunk during college, and your friends would vote whether to take you to the hospital or not. And they'd literally most likely decide not to because they'd be like, how pissed is Eddie gonna be when he wakes up in the morning like he always wakes up? And he's gonna be dealing with the cops because he snorted coke that night and God knows what else he's got on him. All this shit that we have to worry about. Anyway, in most places, it's now the case that we're not supposed to get in trouble if we're on drugs but seeking help, because they realize it's increasing the odds that kids are going to vote accidentally kill themselves. Yes?
Just one more.
Oh, sorry, yeah,
question.
please.
Personally, I never tried one of them, and I don't even smoke, but I have friends who actually smoked weed, and it can be a cliche or a random question, but why do people do stuff like this? I mean, for example, when I asked my friend why do you smoke marijuana, he told me that he doesn't smoke for himself, he smokes for his friends because they like to see him smoke marijuana.
Social pressure?
Yeah, he thinks he's tougher when he smokes marijuana and stuff, and I told him it might be bad for you and stuff, but I mean, if you would like to drink it, it's your life, it's your choices and stuff. But at the end of the day, why do people with the kids that knowing the risks of, for example, sniffing heroin? You mentioned that heroin by sniffing it's more safer rather than injection.
Definitely.
Uh,
Still a risk, obviously.
yeah, I mean, but why do they do that when, if they overdose, they go to the hospital or even death?
Right.
Is it a social pressure or is it something individually it's dependent from us?
It's definitely a combination. I mean, the general population, it's a mix of numerous variables. One, certainly social pressure, and if not obvious on the surface social pressure, I think a lot of what we do as human beings is very related to our surroundings, our environment, right? There is no population in human history that did not have mind-altering substances. So the very existence of them, right, increases the odds right there. Then, right, any random night, personally, I'll be fine not having a drink. Stimulating conversation, what have you. If somebody offers me a drink, I might take it. Somebody else happens to have a little cocaine on their person, I might ask to try it. Depending on my mood, depending on the dynamics. It's hard to say. Even, most people don't even know what drives themselves. A fun, quick response. I think that, and there are a number of other, well, I'll get to it, but boredom, I think, is the number one, most innocent, common reason why most humans are trying to escape their typical day-to-day consciousness. Take a little break, a little vacation. It's one of the most efficient ways. Smoking a joint, which is, out of any drug we're talking about, or maybe arguably any drug we could talk about, marijuana is one of the safest possible options. And for a lot of people, it's a nice break in their day, however you want to put it. I'll end this by saying that if we're discussing more in a psychological framework, there are theories on each genre of drug and what that person is trying to cope with. So in the frame of self-medicating, right? In the way that if my friend and I are studying for final exams, he has Adderall, or maybe speed, more likely. Maybe I want to study a little harder, I'm having trouble focusing, maybe I try a little speed in order to focus. People who smoke marijuana, they would argue if you're not just doing it for fun with friends recreationally, you might be dealing with anxiety. They correlate psychedelics with a search for a certain spirituality and wholeness. I think stimulants sometimes maybe to do with depression. A lot of these recreational drugs are actually or have been used medicinally. Mushrooms, there's a study in New York City right now. They're being used to treat people with for their anxiety and depression who are dying from cancer. MDMA, I know people underground illegally who use MDMA in 8-hour psychotherapy sessions because it helps people open up. I have a few patients in my practice who drink a beer or two during the session because they feel more comfortable and they're more likely to talk and open up and are uninhibited about it. I could say the same sometimes of other drugs, but it can be random and they can all have different effects on different people. So boredom, social pressure, individual need to feel a certain way. And yeah, risk in everything. There's risk in not using certain substances. So always to think about. Yeah.
Usually, and also in the videos, the focus was more the focus was more on.
You gotta do it when they're not looking. When they're not looking,
Exactly,
natural.
Was
Ooh, can we all do a group photo after? If you're not
Yeah,
weirded out about being here.
but the focus was mainly on the short-term, like influences and impacts of drugs. Like
Right.
if you, for example, use heroin, you're going to die. Or if you use methamphetamines, your teeth are going to get, But I think that do you think that it's necessary, like, to focus more on long-term causes of drugs? For example, brain damage, which is like most common side effect of using various substances, especially methamphetamines and ketamine at the same time, and then continuing with heroin, methadone, and other drugs.
Yeah, and this is, I do. I think that every topic around this issue should have a film made about it, should be written about, discussed. Why I said in the beginning, as far as the goal here, like you said, short term, overdose prevention, prevention of contracting disease. Somebody really freaked out at me recently about, like, why the fuck aren't we talking about addiction, in each episode. And I was like, that's a different fucking movie, Like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry if I'm seeming defensive, but my concern for my friends and my motivation behind all this, initially I was 20 years old when I started researching and writing. I was much younger than that when I started experimenting and realizing that the laws and lack of education are horrible. But my concern, much greater actually, if you want me to pick a side, would be the overdose potential. Definitely. But it is, I think that there could be an extra addiction episode on all these. There's actually, we might do, some might consider this boring, but we might do a where are they now, 5 or 6 years later, of each of these people, because it is pretty random. They're all over the place, and some with serious problems, some not, and totally successful. And in between. But yeah, it would be, yes, please.
Another thing that concerns me in Kosovo in general is that, for example, people that used to be addicted on heroin or opiates, I'm talking about other heavy drugs that they consider, they have a hard time actually quitting here because it's a small city, for example, Pristina, and you would know, for example, 2 or 3 people that used heroin in their past, so it's kind of hard for them to actually get along with other people in the society, because there's also bias from people that don't use drugs, but there's also stereotypes and from people that use drugs. For example, I have friends that, for example, use, cocaine or speed amphetamine, and if they see someone that used heroin, they would be like, don't stay with him, because you know what I'm trying to say?
Someone in Skopje a few days ago was openly talking shit during the movie because he was a heroin user and he was disgusted at watching the cocaine users, really openly judging. So I'm aware of what you're talking about. It is harder in seemingly smaller populations, right? If you have to bump into your former heroin buddies all the time at the bar or wherever. This is why people, when they go to treatments, often detox and rehab, you are removed from your day-to-day living situation because it would be that much harder to practice not using while bumping into friends and such, or people who are still judging you for using in the first place. That said, I think a big reason why the failure rate of rehab as far as long-term abstinence is because you're not actually learning to be sober in your real life. It's easier to do when you're like up in the mountains, just, you know, singing every day. So, sorry, I've kind of forgotten the question, but it's harder, but I think that the better likelihood of long-term success of either abstinence or moderation is gained through developing better discipline in what you want to be like a sustainable lifestyle. Although it is at times absolutely necessary for someone to go detox in a safe setting somewhere else. And yes, back to addiction, long-term effects. I think we may have touched on long-term effects like in voiceover at the end of episodes, but that it would be, well, I also think that a lot of material probably does exist already on that. One of the main reasons why we made this series was because most of the footage, the visual aids that existed at the time, really did focus on like demonizing or glorifying drug use, right? Most of the nonfiction shows we saw or still see are like, you know, intervention. People have heard of this? No? But like, it's when somebody's hitting rock bottom and their life is like fucking sucks by anyone's perspective, and they're getting abducted in a van and forced into treatment. Or we're watching a narrative film in which like it's the coolest situation ever and really sexy, and you know, kids are getting the wrong idea that like everyone's gonna be, you know, George Young from Glow or something, which is not the case. So wanting to present more of a realistic day-to-day functional casual recreational user current episode of just trying to protect himself that day and, you know, in the next short term. I imagine you could find a lot of material on addiction. Just, you know, ideally triple, quadruple check it to make sure that they're not like having an agenda to push scaring the shit out of you to just not try drugs in the first place, which actually will make it more dangerous for you in the short term. I believe you had your hand up and then you're in the middle.
Hi. First
Hey.
of all, congratulations on your documentary.
Thanks.
I thought it was very useful and educational. My question is if you did any research or have any personal points of view on a drug called Crocodile, which I saw on some documentaries, but short ones. I saw it was pretty damaging, but not any much information.
Was it, I think like Vice did an episode, maybe based in Russia?
Yeah, that one.
I actually know very little. Crocodile,
Yeah.
anyone know more about this?
Some sort of codeine filtered, made in kitchen with some tools
Yeah.
because of lack of methadone and the lack of services in Russia. That it was almost like oxycontin and all these opiates that existed.
But more problematic, I think.
Even more.
Right.
If you haven't watched the Vice, it's just.
I think I remember seeing parts, it was a while ago.
Yeah, it's called like flesh eating.
Sorry about that.
Something.
Yeah.
Alligator. So yeah, and there was some information that is getting like spread out to the Balkans. If they write the Belgrade, I saw an article.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the case though, but people tend to freak out about this crocodile thing.
Does everybody know Lindor from Labyrinth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I it's cute, yeah, it's cute, but
Co-hosting this event.
So,
Yeah, no, I do think Vice does good work.
with a little bits of exaggeration maybe.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. But no, I need to research more. I I've never really written about it or read too much, and certainly haven't filmed it. But we are thinking in moving forward. We've been planning always on continuing with further episodes, more obscure drugs, more obscure different routes of administration, the way you take something. But that we could be filming on a more global level. Not just in the United States, not just like what was common with college kids at the time. That was the focus, well, like in life, because of what we had access to and who I felt or knew would be the initial primary audience because of the relationship I had built over time speaking at colleges. But yeah, we should be shooting a crocodile episode somewhere in Russia, ideally. Yeah. I like your Batman t-shirt.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say that I love the film. I found it very emotional, even though most of the situations, not all of them were under control. I love how you managed to capture also how difficult it is to actually get into the person's head and their perception of reality to let them know that everything is okay. But the thing is that all of these were in house environments, and usually people who do, or in the park, but a lot of people who do take these substances, they are more in clubs or loud places surrounded by people, and they're much more vulnerable to their surroundings. So how do you manage to keep yourself under control or somebody else? Because if you're in such a surrounding, the possibility is that the people around you are also going to be on drugs. So it's not like in your case where you were there, for example, to help the girl on mushrooms or the one on ketamine.
Right.
So what happens when you have this chain effect? Because you see the other person freaking out or having a panic attack, and then you're like, okay, then this is not okay. And usually people freak out and they end up not helping each other. So how do you prevent that from going to crazy for no reason?
I don't think it's so much of like a domino effect where like one person's having a bad trip and then they affect the whole club. But
Not the whole club, but the
Right.
like your friends.
yeah,
You just get a friend that doesn't need drugs.
I think it's a good question, and if I can answer part of one of your comments, that it's much. I wish that we could have been in even like more of real social dynamics. It becomes a million times more complicated filming this kind of thing, or downright impossible. As far as like certain audio getting in the way, people, you have to have people then like signing on to be there in the background, and it just could become an enormous mess. As you start using a substance, especially your first time, when you're more likely to have an unpredictable time, I would suggest, for starters, making sure that you are doing it in a safer environment. That your first time on a drug not be in a sea of 5,000 people, where like you could have a nervous breakdown just by having to get to the bathroom, which like can happen sober, if you're in the middle of like a rave, and it takes 40 minutes to get somewhere. Again, having friends around, maybe not all whom are on the same drug. You know how ideally we have a designated driver? You know this term? Right? If 4 of us are going out tonight, 3 people are going to get real drunk, ideally one person stays sober enough to drive safer. There is no safe. Ignore the title of the film. It's all just extents and degrees of safety and danger. But yeah, I wouldn't be putting myself in a more vulnerable situation until I was more experienced with the substance. Of Of course, one can still have a bad trip, we don't know what dose we had, which is something else. Creating good relationships with drug dealers, doctors, testing things. There was that reference about testing kits, they're just all over now. Different reagents people are selling to test chemicals, what they are. Again, to increase the chance that you're not freaking out. Of course, you have your friends also freaking out while you're freaking out. Trying something, I know I'm giving you ways to like prevent the question and not necessarily deal with it, but it's important and frankly like better information almost. Trying something from a batch of the stuff you're getting, even if you've tried ketamine 25 times, 100 times. Every time you buy a new batch, it might not be the drug that you want it to be. You snort the smallest amount possible, or rub a little on your gums, see what it tastes like, right? Make sure like it is what it is. Or how about within that night, if we were all like having to go to this party, in your explanation, in your description, could we, right, the shit's gonna last like 6 hours, 8 hours, could we take it at home first or on the way, see how we feel an hour in, make sure we're actually in the right mindset and still prepared to like go have the evening we're trying to have? Would be a thing. You have a comment relevant to?
Actually, I want to say something.
Please.
About the fact, play safe. It's alright for drug users or people who use different substances to learn how to play it safe, but what about the ones who are next to them? Like in high school, I faced lots of cases when friends or friends of friends use drugs and mixed it with alcohol, and then they had different severe shocks or consequences, and you don't know what to do because you cannot call the cops, and you don't know how to help them. So luckily me, my mom is a doctor, so I can call her. This happened. She's open-minded enough for a parent in Kosovo to actually help me and talk me through it.
That's terrific.
But most of the parents aren't, so you don't get to call your mom or your dad, what do I do to help my
Right.
friend?
All afraid of
who's
getting in
on
trouble.
drugs. So would it be good to actually add that part as well? For people who actually want to help friends, especially like teenagers, because they don't get a point where, or someone who can like ask help from. So would it be better actually to add that part as well?
I think it would be more important to educate the people who are actually gonna be more sober,
Yeah.
right?
Personally, I had no idea what to do. When you are a teenager, you cannot call the cops.
Right.
You cannot call no one. If you tell someone
You end
I'm
up
calling
sticking
my
your
mom,
fingers down your friend's throat.
if you tell someone I'm calling my mom to ask for help what to do with this friend, they're gonna ban you for life.
Right,
But it was their first reaction. No, don't, because my mom will tell your mom.
I hear you.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that this should all be mandatory education for like age 8 and up. Maybe 11 and up, depending on the episode, so that people know how to take care of each other. Like in your situation. And, you know, ideally, I think that the best thing might be that you're with people who actually